Supply chain finance is, for me, one of the most overlooked things, and I think is one of our biggest, undoings, that we haven't been able to crack the code of supply chain finance in Africa. Every time we talk about SMEs, every time we talk about the inability to access finance, the same issues come up all the time. We're talking about collateral, we're talking about they not having, financial statements that make sense, we're talking about capacity building and so on. Supply chain finance is the way you finance businesses that look like that, all right? If you want to finance businesses in any other way, who have the financials and who have the capacity and everything, that's one way to do it. But the solution to financing SMEs who don't have all of these things is supply chain finance. And we all need to ask ourselves, everybody in the supply chain, from the big anchors to the local financial institutions, to the regulators, to the development banks, we need to ask ourselves why we have failed in executing a supply chain finance program, which actually forms part of our biggest solution to SME financing. How have we talked about SME financing for years and still haven't managed to figure out supply chain finance? I think it's a huge panacea to solving for the SME finance gap, and all of us need to get together to find a solution to bring in supply chain finance into our market.
100 million SMEs in Africa access only 20% of finance from the banks. How good is that? How can the SMEs grow? So what we are talking about is an increased funding for them. We are talking about changing the templates. We're not talking about blended finance. We're not talking about patient capital. We're talking about a new model of finance.
We need to start looking inward as African banks and try to think about how we can solve for that trade finance gap. What I'm saying is that African banks and the African financing business community need to come together and commit to 100 billion of intra-Africa trade financing over the next 2-3 years or so. And that's, you can't achieve anything that you're not intentionally measuring, right? So once we set this target, and all well-meaning financial institutions in Africa who claim to be African banks, who claim to be on the continent and are willing to serve the continent, to commit to the challenge and report on it. So every year when I take Ecobank or UBA or AfCFTA financials, I should be able to see how much they've done in intra-Africa trade finance. And we put all of that together, and at the end of the 2-3 years say, we have been able to achieve 100 billion in intra-Africa trade financing, right? And I think that's